For the last 50 years, the Museum of Contemporary Photography at Columbia College Chicago has been exhibiting some of the most thought-provoking images in the medium. They've acquired over 18,000 objects by more than 2,000 artists. Now, you can get an inside look into how the museum built its fantastic collection with the exhibition MOCP at 50, Collecting Through the Decades. On view January 22nd through mid-May. Celebrate MOCP's 50th anniversary at the museum in the South Loop. Visit mocp.org for more information.
Chicago knows how to kick off a new year, and that's with great food. That's right. Chicago Restaurant Week is back from January 23rd through February 8th. The 19th annual event produced by Choose Chicago features prefix menus. I'm talking $30 for lunch and brunch, $45 and $60 for dinner at more than 500 restaurants across the city. You can use the website to see the full list or filter by cuisine type or use the map feature. But pro tip, make your reservations as soon as possible because they go quick. Explore participating restaurants and menus at chicagorestaurantweek.com and book your tables now.
Today on CityCast Chicago, Barnes & Noble, the last of the giant chain bookstores, is opening a massive flagship store in downtown Chicago this summer after a decade of shuttering locations. But what does this resurgence mean for Chicago's independent bookstores? It's Thursday, January 15th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago is talking about. I am joined today by host of Happy to Be Here and creator of the Greta Graham newsletter, Greta Johnson. Welcome back to the podcast, my friend.
Hi, Jacoby. Thanks for having me.
So let's jump into it. Barnes & Noble is planning to open 4 new shops around Chicago this year, including, as I alluded to, a massive 30,000 square foot, 3-story location in the Loop, in the site of the Old Navy. Where else are they planning to open this year in the Chicagoland area, my friend?
They're planning on opening in Hyde Park. They want to move to a bigger location in Skokie, and they will open a new location in Oak Park. Mm-hmm. And of course, they've already opened stores in the last year or so in both Wicker Park and Lincoln Park.
I saw the news when they announced they were opening in Hyde Park because a group of bookstore owners from Call and Response Books, from 57th Street Books, from Powell Books, kind of came together and really were urging community members to continue to shop local, to be aware of this move into the neighborhood and how it may ultimately impact some of those independent shops, which we're going to talk about in today's conversation, of course. But what was your reaction to just finding out that there were new stores popping up across the city, even dating back to the Wicker Park and Lincoln Park locations opening?
Yeah, I think this one is really complicated. I think there are a lot of layers to it. I think ultimately, like I remember back to being in 4th or 5th grade and hanging out in the kids section of Borders and loving that experience. And ultimately just wanting like as many books for as many people as possible, right? I think the complications, as you mentioned, for sure come when, you know, a Barnes & Noble opens within a mile, like on the same street as a smaller shop, like, for example, Volumes in Wicker Park, which now is going to be closing. And they're saying the main reason for that is because of a pretty severe decline in sales after the Barnes & Noble moved in.
This is very complicated because at least for, in my mind, the last 20 years, whether you were talking to a chain bookstore owner, an indie bookstore owner, or even like a library, for example, it was all, these places are on the slow decline. Amazon and online retailers have sort of taken over. And so to see during the pandemic and then the years since the height of the pandemic, to see new independent bookstores pop up in Chicago has been great to attend their events. And now to see Barnes & Noble come back, like you say, it's sort of like, oh, all right, this isn't just a great time for the independent. So have you visited the Wicker Park location? It was in a historic building, a former bank.
It's a beautiful building. I have not gone in. I think full disclosure, I'm friends with Rebecca. It probably has to do with a little bit of Volumes allegiance. Rebecca George, of course, being the owner of Volumes. I'm sure it's beautiful. You know, it's I think the other thing that's worth pointing out is, like, as you mentioned too, the Amazon of it all. And I mean, Amazon is actively disrupting the publishing industry by offering books at steep discounts.
Yep.
Amazon is, has a history of not treating its employees well. These are things I can't say for Barnes and Noble. So they're also in this really weird gray area around, like, they're disrupting the industry, but not to the extent that Amazon is, for what it's worth.
And I have visited the Wicker Park location, and I will say, I thought it wasn't simply from my experience being inside. This wasn't just they reopened the old Barnes and Noble. It felt like they had taken considerations on, like, what people want from the new generation of Barnes and Noble. It felt like there was more space to sit down, more space to be with your friends. Honestly, the only reason I went, Greta, because I did not buy books when I went, the Lego collection was wild. I did not expect they had the Home Alone house. You can't find that anywhere outside of a Lego store. You know what I'm saying? And so the feeling I got going in was like, this wasn't the Barnes and Noble I remember growing up. But I also love Volumes Book Cafe down the street. I love Quimby's bookstore and their selection of Zines. I love Perpetual Books. I love Open Books, Logan Square, or Myopic Books, which is literally right across the street from the Barnes and Noble location. And so on the one hand, my initial reaction was kind of in the same vein that Barnes & Noble CEO James Daunt spoke with on WBEZ earlier this week was, okay, they are doing something that's different than these other stores. For me in particular, I'm able to get Legos here that I'm not able to get at these other places. But like you, my allegiance to these other bookstores, I wasn't leaving out of there with new books. They're not getting my money for that, but they did have other things that the other locations didn't. You know, how do you typically consume your books? Where do you like to buy them?
So I do a lot of course, I go to indie bookstores. I also really like bookshop.org, which is a website where you can choose which independent bookstore you want to support, like any across the country, and then you can order online that way.
I did a few book wish lists during the holiday season, like bought books off of bookshop.org for like kids and young people.
And then I do a lot of audiobook listening. And so I really like Libro.fm for that, which is essentially the non-Amazon version of Audible. Okay. And it functions exactly the same. It has the exact same pricing and availability of books. So Libro is really great too. And yeah, I think what's really tough about, like, you know, you mentioned what James said about how they're doing something different. Barnes & Noble is doing something different than indie booksellers. It seems like essentially what he's saying is that the different thing they're doing is just having a bunch of books. And I looked into it. Barnes & Noble, on average, according to their website, their stores usually have about 100,000 books in a store. And I asked Rebecca George at Volumes what their inventory is typically like. And she said peak holiday season, like around December, it wouldn't be more than like 18,000.
Okay.
So you think about it just from a use case situation. And like, if what you want from a bookstore is just like the cool historical fiction book you just heard about and are really curious and you want to start today, like the odds that Barnes & Noble is going to have that versus your small independent bookstore is in the favor of Barnes & Noble, unfortunately. And I think that's part of the problem, is that so many people, I think especially again because of Amazon, are used to like the immediacy of it all, right? And like, no, I want it now, and I don't want to wait on the library hold list, and I want it in my hands today. Then odds are you probably are going to go to a Barnes & Noble, unfortunately.
I mean, what's behind this resurgence of being in? Like, again, any organization that was in the book business essentially over the last 25 years, at least from what I heard, was that they are dying, that they are out of here. They are archaic. What's leading to this current resurgence where they're not just opening one store or a couple stores, they're opening 6 in the last year or so, between last year and this year. And Greta, these are big locations, 30,000 square feet downtown. They old bank in Wicker Park, replacing the largest vacancy in Oak Park. Like, these are flagship locations in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it was during the pandemic and online ordering then. I also have heard that they were really good about providing educational resources for folks then, which especially when kids were at home, is huge. But I mean, it is a really interesting question, especially given the fact, I mean, there was a study that came out last year that said that like reading for pleasure over the last 20 years has declined by like 40% among Americans, and I'm sure you're familiar too. Like I've heard about any number of studies that shows that especially like Gen Z, like they're not necessarily picking up books. So, I think partly why I'm so conflicted about the whole thing is like in the end, I want people reading stuff. I want people to be excited about reading. And that, then it's like, sure, if they can get the book at Barnes and Noble today, I suppose I can't be mad about that,
Is this a fad, you think? I mean, because, part of what I've read is that book talk over the last 5-6 years has really exploded. People will do silent reviews. People will say, oh, I'm about to read this book for the first time. And then they cut and they are absolutely bawling. People doing their list. Like it's become a true place of content creation. But is it sustainable not only for the new local bookstores who are opening up off this momentum, but a chain who is essentially strapping its resurgence to this book talk post-pandemic rocket?
I would like to say no. I mean, I think to me, the joy of reading is that there is something out there for everyone. You just have to find the right book for them. And that excitement when you do find a book that you really connect with and you realize that author has written 7 other books or whatever is like, that's real. And I think that can sustain a lifelong pleasure, So I don't know. I think certainly there are books that like become fads partly because of book talk, for example. But even then, I think if it's about championing books, I think that's great.
It's a new year, and that means Chicago's theater scene has got shows you need to put on your calendar, starting with Eureka Day, the winner of the 2025 Tony Award for Best Revival of a Play, and it's making its Chicago premiere. So what happens is this school in California, Eureka Day School, is hit with a mumps outbreak. Already tragic, right? Now, this sends parents and the entire school board into chaos as they clash over vaccines, personal freedoms, and of course, viral misinformation. This hit satire is funny, it's intelligent, and it captures the absurdity of modern discourse on parenting and public health perfectly. Presented by Timeline Theater Company, Eureka Day is at the Broadway Playhouse running from January 13th through February 22nd. So go on and get your tickets now because they start at just $25 at BroadwayInChicago.com. It's a new year and we've all got goals and things we want to accomplish. And if getting new windows is on your list, then Window Nation has the perfect sale for you. Right now, when you buy 4 windows, you can get 4 free. So maybe it's a good time to do your whole house. You get custom built, high quality windows and maybe save on those future heating bills. Plus, you can get them with 0 down, 0 monthly payments, and 0 interest for 2 years. Installation crews finish the job in a day or less, so don't just tough it out for the rest of the winter. Schedule a fast, free estimate now at windownation.com.
I'm hearing more New Year's resolutions that are around reading. I'm hearing more people who want to put their phone down. I'm hearing the more, as more people are using AI or ChatGPT, you have a good contingency on the other end who are protesting by way of moving back to like physical text or picking up audio books. What have we heard from indie Chicago bookstore owners in the city?
Well, yeah, you mentioned the CEO of Barnes & Noble being on WBEZ. He was on a segment of In the Loop, also with Rebecca Georgia Volumes, and Courtney Bledsoe of Call and Response in Hyde Park, who, of course, has concerns due to the new opening of the Hyde Park location of Barnes & Noble. I thought those two spoke very eloquently and very clearly about their concerns. I mean, Rebecca George of Volumes has said very clearly that she believes it is because of the proximity of that Barnes & Noble that they have to close their doors, which is devastating. I will also say, I think the CEO of Barnes & Noble saying that Volumes is a cafe and not a bookstore is pretty offensive. And
as she responded,
yes,
he was trying to make the point that they take consideration when thinking about the neighborhoods they're moving in. Their hope is to be a partner to drive up business for everyone, but that they made their decisions based on what people in the neighborhood were doing. So he said the reason the Wicker Park location doesn't do a ton of community events or doesn't
and they don't have a cafe,
have food or drinks is because Volumes was doing that. And we didn't want to step on their toes. But Rebecca aptly responded, books are 85% of our business. And so positioning this as we're the bookstore without the cafe while you're the cafe with the bookstore.
I mean, he called it a cafe with books on the side, essentially, which is just like, that's pretty insulting.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, I mean, I think what it comes down to is these independent booksellers cannot compete with the inventory Barnes & Noble's going to have in these giant spaces, right? So, and you heard this especially, I think, from Courtney from Call and Response. You think about a bookstore like Women and Children First. That's
in Andersonville.
These are deeply rooted community spaces that put on a variety of different sorts of events with authors, with, drag story time, like all sorts of different ways that they are connecting with their communities. They are offering highly curated book selections based on who works there and what they're reading. And I think that is that niche is what these indie bookstores are going to need in order to be able to continue to carve out those spaces for themselves, I think. Because then it is more than, do you have this one title today? And it's, oh, did you see Hanif Abdurraqib is coming to town? That's awesome. Let's go, I
actually hosted the very first event at Call and Response Books in Hyde Park with our great friend Ariane Nettles. When her book, We Are the Culture, Black Chicago's Influence on Everything dropped. And it actually opened up right across the street from my former apartment. And it is a smaller, intimate location. They've got a couch where they host the events. The book selection is a lot smaller. But as Courtney said, if they had to hang their hat on just how quickly a person can come in and get a book, that's not what they're there for. They're there to be a community space, a safe space for folks, a place where you can be in conversation with the authors who come for events, with community members, and they're willing to order the books for you. And so for her, she, again, signed on with the other bookstores in Hyde Park to talk about essentially the existential threat put in place by Barnes & Noble opening. But she also made it very clear that she does think they do something different. And so if you are hoping to have a community space that you can build a long-term relationship with, even a partnership with, if you're a local school or a local daycare or a local fitness group, that's what they provide that Barnes & Noble, in many ways, could never provide.
No.
Even as you're listening to that BEZ interview, the CEO is from Europe and he's in Seattle. He and at no point in this conversation, and you don't imagine he's the CEO of a large chain company, there's no localism in the way he talks about Barnes & Noble. It is simply in spaces that maybe were former bookstores or were vacant and needed a large retailer, but he doesn't necessarily have a sense of how it plays into the fabric of that neighborhood already.
And yeah, you mentioned the idea of being able to order books from these bookstores if they're not in inventory. I think that's really like the best attitude to have as you're walking into an independent bookstore is like, sure, you have a title in mind. You can always order it if they don't have it. But the other thing, like, go with an open mind and be curious and ask the people working there what they're reading and loving, because they are some of the most enthusiastic ambassadors of reading. They're like librarians too, right? They're just like the best sorts of nerds that want to share all the stuff that they love with you. So to go into any bookstore, any independent bookstore in the city and say, hey, what's good? Like, you're going to walk away with so many amazing recommendations.
Over the last couple years, Sam Myers Bookstore in Printers Row has become my local bookstore. And to your point, I've gone in there with a book in mind a couple of times, but mostly I go in there. They have a great employee suggestions section.
Mm-hmm.
I love to pick up a coffee table book, some poetry, but I'm never going in there, gun ho on grabbing one particular thing. And if they don't have it, I'm leaving. Every time I go in there, my goal is to leave with something. And their recommendations are typically a great place to start. Or I go into their Chicago collection and just grab something to put on my shelf. And so I agree with you, having that attitude about going into your indie bookstore, which, if you are trying to just grab something, you know what you want and you're trying to grab it, I would still maybe just look on their website, give them a call. That's something that is really offered at these local bookstores that you may not necessarily find at a Barnes & Noble, though from what I'm hearing, one part of their new strategy is giving the local teams more autonomy on what the store design looks like, what the events will be like, what some of the book selection is. I do think that's a great practice if you are going to be opening what are now proving in some neighborhoods more contentious locations, at least allowing the staff to be able to bring a level of localism in here.
Capitalism thrives on the illusion of individual choice, of course. Yep. But one thing I will say is something that is also can be really helpful both for independent booksellers and for publishers and authors is to pre-order a book that you're really excited about too. Mm-hmm. So, if there's a book that that's coming out later this year that you're super excited about, order it through call and response or, whatever bookstore you want. And they will have it available for you the day it comes out. And pre-orders also help publishers know what the interest level is in certain titles, which is also really helpful.
Yeah. I saw a response from Steve Kirschenbaum, the owner of Looking Glass out in Oak Park, which is a used bookstore that's celebrating 12 years in 2026. And his response was, I am a firm believer that the more bookstores there are in an area, the more book lovers will visit all of them. And that's something you kind of said earlier, is you just want more people reading. And so it's fair to ask, do you believe chain bookstores and indie bookstores can coexist?
I do. I think a lot of it comes back to kind of what I was talking about in terms of indie bookstores finding their niche. I think if they do have kind of a specialty, a specific vibe, a stake they've really put down in the community, that's going to make a huge difference. Because then, sure, Barnes & Noble has the inventory, but if you want to see what your friend Rebecca is really reading and liking these days, because she has great taste and she's at the bookstore down the street, then you're going to go to the indie bookstore, So I don't know. I think that's another one where capitalism also thrives on scarcity. And I love the idea that there's, enough of an abundant literary culture, especially in a city like Chicago, where all of this stuff can sustain itself. I think we're just going to have to see.
Yeah. Rebecca pointed out that, as Barnes & Noble have said that they're trying not to step on the toes of indie bookstores, she's pointed out that they've opened a location near Anderson's bookstores in Naperville, essentially down the street from Book Bend and Northbrook, the Book Loft, Dandelion Books in Oak Park. We know Wicker Park, Hyde Park. And so they are moving into places that have already proven themselves to be ecosystems for local readers. And so it's very difficult, but you grew up where the McDonald's, Burger King, Wendy's, they were all next to each other because they knew, well, this is where people are coming.
Right.
And so you understand the economics of where they're moving and the decision-making, but at the same time, we can't ignore that the idea that this will simply, that this is a trickle-down economic situation, that this will build up the stock of readers in the neighborhood and they will flow down to the indie bookstores, I don't think will necessarily prove itself to be true. I think the independent bookstores will probably have to cut their teeth off of, like you said, leaning into their niche a little bit more, but probably tighter margins.
Yeah, I think too, it's interesting that you mentioned the fast food chains because, I can't help but think of food deserts, right? Which of course are abundant in the city of Chicago, which is also not necessarily a coincidence, right? This is by design. And I think you can make the same argument about book deserts, right? And how great would it be if instead of your Wicker Parks and your Lincoln Parks and your Skokies, if a company like Barnes & Noble, who has the resources clearly, were able to open in, some of the more severely under-resourced neighborhoods in the city.
100%. I mean, we've kind of mentioned a bunch of different places to get books to spend your time if you're a reader, but Are there enough readers to go around, given that Amazon dominates the market in the way it does? Barnes & Noble is having a resurgence moment. Local chains are both opening and closing around the city of Chicago. And we are people who want individuals to utilize our library resources as much as possible. And their budget is constantly under threat, and have had to transform. Are there enough readers to go around, Greta?
You're painting a very dire picture, and I think that's not inaccurate. One thing that I find hope in is on the Happy to Be Here Instagram towards the end of the year last year, I asked people how many books they read just because I was curious. And I think I heard from 80-ish people. And granted, this is an extremely small sample size of extremely nerdy humans, but the average number of books that these people read last year was 70, which is huge. And I think that does allow for the library and,
no. You said 17,
70 books a year. I also heard from some people who said 2 or whatever, right? But any books that you're reading is good. And I think, especially for really voracious readers, which do still exist. I mean, you think about the TV show Heated Rivalry and how huge that is. It's based on a book. Those books are almost out of print right. They're difficult to find in print form right now because that show was so popular. And romance readers especially, they read, I think it's an average of 10 books a month. They read hard. So the appetite is there. I think it does exist, and I think they all can sustain each other, or at least hopefully they can.
What would be your suggestions to maybe strike a balance, whether they're a low reader or high reader, in terms of library, local chains?
I mean, speaking for myself, I do not buy books on Amazon. That is 0% not happening. I've fully divested from Amazon. I'm not using Audible. I mentioned Libro for audiobooks. That's a great way of doing it. I think it's really I really like to get on as many library hold lists as I can, and then I game it out, right? And my Aunt Sharon is so good at this. And so maybe it's 10 weeks until the book you really want to read. So then maybe you would order it from an indie because you want to read it before then. Or maybe you're it's fine if I wait 10 weeks, right? So I think a lot of it is based on library availability and then just kind of figuring the rest out from there. I mean, library is also something that, at least for now, still are funded by the government. They are considered a public good, which we love our public goods, man.
I am with you. I am trying to make sure I am factoring in my library, factoring in my local bookstore. And last year I started using bookshop.org a lot more.
They're great.
All right. So I can't end this conversation without asking you the books you are looking forward to reading amongst you much higher than 70, right? How many did you crack last year?
Over 100, just over 100.
Just over 100. And how have you paced so far? 2 weeks into the year?
Oh gosh, good question. I think I've read 5 or 6.
What are you talking about?
Okay, maybe not. Maybe 4 or 5.
No. Keep your answer. That was it wasn't even the answer as much as it was the casual. I was just all right, 2 weeks into the year, you said 5 or 6. What? Okay, all right. So you have read 5 or 6 books to this point. What are a few books you are looking forward to reading at some point this year?
This is a really exciting year for books, but it's always easy to say that in January, I feel because I'm still feeling fresh and optimistic about, how great everything is in the world right now, because it's all just fine and dandy. But I brought 3 titles of books by Chicago authors that we can talk about. And I want to shout out the Chicago Review of Books, who wrote a really great, super lengthy, in detail list of a bunch of Chicago books coming out this year, which is wonderful. So yeah, one is called Wreck Your Heart. It's by Lori Rader Day. It already came out, and it's about a singer at a country bar in Chicago. And it seems like it's kind of got some gritty noir detective vibes. It's about this up and coming singer whose boyfriend leaves her, and then her mom shows up and leaves, and then someone comes saying that they have the same mom and she has disappeared. So it looks like a really fun mystery. I'm very curious about this one.
Okay, so number 1 on the list, Wreck Your Heart. What's next?
Leave Your Mess at Home by Tolani Akinola. This comes out April 14th, and it was blurbed by both Rachel Khong and Curtis Sittenfeld, who are 2 highly regarded novelists. This is about Ola, who is like a recently disgraced influencer who secretly moves back home to Chicago.
Okay.
And she has 3 siblings who are also like variably messy. And the cover is gorgeous. And I think it looks really good.
Leave Your Mess at Home, April 14th. That's number 2. And
Yep.
number 3.
Number 3, it comes out May 12th. It's by Veronica Roth. It's called Seek This Traitor's Son. Veronica, of course, famously wrote the Divergent series. She has written a great many books since then. This one is called an epic romantic dystopian fantasy, which
what a
sounds
title.
like just the escapism we need in this year of our Lord 2026.
I love that the title sounds like the blurb.
Right? Seek the traitor's son.
All right, I will drop your list in the show notes alongside the Chicago Review of Books most anticipated reads of 2026. Greta, I appreciate you making time for CityCast Chicago. For listeners, please subscribe to Happy to Be Here and the Greta Graham newsletter. As always, a good time, my friend. Now, of course, we can't get out of here without some good news. And since we talked about bookstores all episode long, it only makes sense I give you some events happening around the city, including Women and Children First in Andersonville, welcoming authors Adam Morgan and Julia Fine tonight at 7 o'clock. The Book Joint in South Shore is hosting Vibe Check, Vision Board, and Junk Journal Party Friday from 7 to 9. Quimby's in Wicker Park is hosting Keep Your Ear to the Ground and Conversation with John Davis Friday at 6:30. Call and Response in Hyde Park is hosting an interactive story time with L'Oreal Thompson Payton this Saturday morning. Plot Twist in Jefferson Park has kids story time with Miss Miranda Saturday morning. And Los Amigos Books in Bucktown is reopening with new weekend hours Friday through Sunday. That's just a couple of some of your favorite stores around the city. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow. We'll talk to you then. Peace.